When I first started watching the series The Last of Us, I liked it. At first glance, the adaptation was made with care. They tried to carry over all the important features and expand the narrative. And the first episode was really long, and it seemed like they would be able to delve into everything that had to be skipped in the game. At times this made sense, at other times it was simply a new perspective. For example, the pandemic here unfolds a bit less quickly, and the reasons for how it spread are explained. They even mention why our main characters didn't get infected. Plus, they moved the timeline forward by 10 years. Now, the pandemic happened in 2003, but the introduction focuses not on action, but on creating atmosphere and immersion. And the difference is that the game quickly immerses you in the context. It doesn't give you too much information about the characters, but it gives you enough so that you understand who they are and why you should like or dislike them. The series, on the other hand, decided to take a completely different approach. At times it decides to fully reveal the conflict between characters where it wasn't necessary at all, or to explain certain things the main character does. Although this doesn't really add anything new to the narrative either. And yet, the first episode still feels good. It tells us more about Joel, and it shows the different things he has to do. It shows the world that he has to live in. And it even adds some new details, like the fact that we find out Fedra still has operational factories producing weapons and pills, and that's actually pretty cool. As someone who only played the game, I was interested to learn about that. But the problem is, it doesn't add anything to the story when it comes to the main characters. Let me remind you, this game is about two people, Ellie and Joel. They are the real Last of Us, the last ones who still have some humanity left and a desire to exist for more than just themselves. Even though Joel is a controversial character with a dark past at first, if you look at all the characters in the game, you realize that none of them are perfect. Everyone has had to do bad things and make questionable choices just to survive. Otherwise, it's simply impossible to survive in this world. Even Ellie isn't portrayed as just a 14-year-old child in the game, but as a fully formed person who, unfortunately, has already had to go through losing everyone important to her, which has led Ellie to develop true survivor's guilt. Despite her young age, she has already seen things that could seriously affect her psyche. She was raised in an orphanage as a future soldier meant to serve in Fedra. At first glance, this seems like a classic, even cliched story about fathers and children, but it's not that simple. Joel is closed off, having turned his back on the world. He has no reason to live. For a long time, he's just been surviving and will do anything for that, but even he no longer knows why. At the same time, he's an adult, strong character, with a broken moral compass, and at some point, Ellie became that compass for him. From the very beginning of the story, he doesn't try to act like her father. He doesn't try to stop her from swearing, doesn't try to raise her, and generally does everything he can to shake her off so that, God forbid, any emotional connection forms. And that's what makes this game special. From the very beginning, the characters seem incompatible. Ellie at first glance is a strong person who doesn't need any kind of protector. And Joel at first glance has been dead inside for a long time and doesn't need any family. He has a brother, he had Tess, he had friends. But the thing about this game is that it makes it clear that Joel really doesn't have anyone left. Well, at least that's what he believes. He doesn't feel like he has to live for any of them. We can't get inside his head, but all the actions we see him take in the game portray him more as a person without principles. And only over time, after traveling a long road together, do Ellie and Joel grow closer. It turns out that, in fact, they have a lot in common. They have both lost all the people who mattered to them, and even Joel's remaining brother doesn't mean anything to him for a long time because of Joel's emotional state and the trauma he has endured. In general, this is a game about traumatized people who find meaning in life through each other. Joel doesn't get rid of his trauma, but for the first time in 20 years, he is able to accept it. He is able to move on. That's why the ending works so well. It doesn't completely resolve the conflict between the main characters. On the contrary, it creates it for the first time in the entire game. It doesn't resolve Ellie's emotional trauma or her survivor's guilt. And all of this is important to understand because the series takes a completely different path. If the game doesn't try to explain every little detail that affects how we perceive the characters, and instead tells the story through subtle hints showing their closed-off nature even through other characters. For example, in the moment when Tommy realizes what Ellie has come to mean to Joel, even before Joel himself is ready to accept it, the series, in contrast, tries to explain everything, which disrupts the pacing. It makes the characters behave completely differently. They might show more emotion than they were supposed to in the original. They might display entirely different character traits that weren't typical of the original characters. And all of this could be accepted as a new take on the characters if the main storyline changed, if the ending changed, if the key iconic scenes were different, but they were simply copied one-to-one. But unfortunately, the series, which at first at least tried to reveal new sides of the story, at some point just started to compress it to the point of absurdity, which made the ending feel extremely rushed and caused it to lose all the ambiguity that only people who played the game can feel. And let's talk about the actors right away, before we discuss the scenes. Pedro Pascal did an outstanding job. He learned to walk like Joel, learned to speak like Troy Baker, and in many scenes he really does feel like that very same guy. But the changes in the plot, or rather, not even the plot, since the plot stayed the same, but the changes in the script make him not quite the Joel we're used to seeing. The same problem exists with Bella Ramsey. I like the way she acts. At times she can sound exactly like Ashley Johnson, which is actually surprising. But the changes from a script perspective make her a completely different character, one they're trying to squeeze into the same story, which ends up feeling really off. If Joel can sometimes be too soft in the moment and then that suddenly disappears, Ellie at times turns into a child, a hysteric, and sometimes even something worse, which makes it impossible for me to see this as a standalone story. I've played the game many times and I already understand the meaning of every scene, or at least I think I do. I analyze them very carefully and I understand that each of these scenes had a significant impact. There's nothing superfluous in the game and the story told their work so well every time that it never loses its relevance. And the ability to play as these characters, to live through the story, to control them, and to associate yourself much more closely with each of the heroes makes the immersion much stronger than what the series can offer. I don't see a problem with the cast. Yes, some characters look more like their prototypes, while others don't resemble them at all. But the main problem is the script, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about now, using each scene as an example, with each individual episode. Otherwise, it's impossible to break it all down, or I'll miss some very important things. The series starts off in an unusual way. We're given a short lecture, and it's explained to us how cordyceps works. And in the show, they decided to change the concept of how it spreads. Now it spreads exclusively through bites, not through spores like it did in the game. According to the creators, this was done to make the story more realistic, although it didn't actually add any realism because in principle it's not that fantastical an element considering the very concept of the series. Secondly, they decided to return to this in the second season to add more drama. Again, why get rid of it in the first season? That's a big question. Well, let's say one of the reasons was that Pedro Pascal didn't want to wear a mask like he did in The Mandalorian. Poor guy. But apparently, in the second season, that stopped being a problem. But in my opinion, this affected how serious the global threat feels. It comes across as less significant. Masks are no longer part of the narrative, which used to influence the character's behavior in the games. But in principle, this doesn't really matter much for the first season. Moving on. A strange decision. Joel was made much older. In the game, he's 52 at the start of the outbreak. Here, he's already 56. Why? It's unclear. This changes the perception of his physical condition and stamina. They added arthritis, hearing problems, supposedly to make him more vulnerable. But this breaks the core of the character. Joel was always tough and hardened, and that's where his conflict lies. Physical weakness doesn't fit here at all. It only gets in the way. Plus, it undermines the belief that he could even survive in this world. Especially since the second part shows that at 57 he's still strong, but here it seems like in some scenes he can barely move, while in others he's able to take down an entire paramilitary group. Overall, I don't see any depth in this. There's not much realism either. Even 56 years old isn't that much for a man who's constantly fighting to survive. The next scene is the very opening one from the game, and it was super important. From this moment, we start to see Joel and Sarah's relationship. In the series, they recreated it word for word, but ruined the context. First of all, the gift. In the game, Sarah got the money herself, bought the watch, simply because Joel is always busy working and doesn't have time for himself. It's a touching gesture that shows how much she loves him, but in the series, she just fixes the watch with his own money, as if he wouldn't have done it himself. And right away, the whole depth of the moment is lost. They show us directly how she goes to get the watch repaired, and she even explains where she got the money. So her joke about dealing drugs really doesn't work at all, honestly. And most importantly, Joel then wears that broken watch for 20 years. In the game, it's a gift from his daughter, stopped at the moment of her death. It's very touching and dramatic if you think about it. But here, the watch is just repaired, which is much simpler. And basically, that's how it is with everything. Everything shown in the game, everything told in the game. Here, they try to explain, reinterpret, complicate, or add details. But at the same time, they don't add anything new on a larger scale, or even ruin what was already there. They do this not only with Joel and Sarah, but also with side characters, whose backstories aren't that important for Ellie and Joel. It's important to understand the game does this with just a couple of seemingly simple scenes, which actually have a lot of depth, revealing the relationships between all the main characters, sharply shifting the feeling from a normal world to one destroyed by an epidemic, which creates a kind of short-term knockout effect, and a sense of anxiety that quickly transforms into an explained sense of unease. At the same time, in the series, they decided to spend more than 15 minutes spelling out for us how this epidemic began. In other words, they chose to add a sense of mounting tension. Again, I'm not against it. And thanks to this, we got to know Sarah a bit better, but I can't say it made the story even a little bit better, or made Sarah and Joel's relationship any deeper, especially considering the scene with the watch. At the 24th minute, the series almost word for word copies a scene from the game, but loses important context. In the game, we don't know what Joel saw before that, and his line, "If you had seen what I've seen," explains why he doesn't want to pick people up. He understands what this could lead to. We don't know what Tommy knows. And that's how this scene works. In the series, both of them already know what's going on, but Tommy comes off as naive, willing to stop for strangers, while Joel seems overly callous. And all of this is because of a single line. Overall, the whole car ride feels similar to how it felt in the game. Both the camera work and the feeling you get from the characters riding in the car. I mean, you can tell it was made with love and professionalism. But why is the script broken then? Why does no one understand the significance of the lines that were written? I don't understand. In the game, the introduction lasts 20 minutes, and you can actually play the gameplay even longer to really feel the atmosphere. The pacing is precise, nothing unnecessary, only the essentials. In the series, it's 33 minutes where even things you don't really need to know are explained. Instead of a sudden shift from normal life to catastrophe, there's a slow, languid buildup. I wouldn't say one approach is better than the other. They're just different ways of presenting the story. But when the creators start changing the characters' motivations and don't understand why certain lines were originally written, I keep sensing something fake. They even, for some reason, add a scene where Tommy ends up in jail and asks Joel to get him out. Whereas in the game, he was simply trying to get in touch with him. What are they trying to emphasize by doing this? His irresponsibility, stupidity, or just to highlight the difference between them? Well, the game showed that just fine too. It didn't need to explain what was happening in those moments. And it's not necessary for the story because later on they have completely different conflicts. At the 34th minute, there's a scene with a child who, it's unclear for how long or how, managed to reach the safe zone. They check him for infection using the same method they later used on Ellie, and that method showed that she was infected. They give him an injection, he dies, and Joel burns the body. Apparently, they're trying to show us that he's hardened and how terrible the system in Boston is. Maybe there's some kind of parallel suggesting that there are other people with immunity. But here it's not exactly clear. And as I'm writing this, I'm wondering, what's the real problem here? The game is originally built on the conflict of whether to save one person or the whole world, and it doesn't give a clear answer as to what's right. But at the same time, Druckmann is clearly on Joel's side. He would have done the same thing himself. So the gray morality doesn't really work, because the Firefly's motivation, plans, and methods are barely revealed. Everything stays behind the scenes. Okay, they do try to develop Marlene's character. Since Ellie's mom is important to her, so Ellie is important too. I don't know. In the game, they don't seem that close, and in the show, they didn't even know each other before the bite. Aside from the motive of, I knew Anna, so I have to take care of her, there's basically nothing. In the game, I never really believed that Marlene actually cared about Ellie, and in the show, I believe it even less. But in the game, that's okay, because the players themselves make the choice, and for the most part, side with Joel. It works even with the ambiguity. But in the show, they went a completely different route. The Fireflies aren't revealed at all. Instead, the focus is on the fact that Joel isn't a hero, but a selfish person, a killer, a monster. And for everyone who hasn't played, his action just looks like evil. The lack of gameplay, cutscenes, and reworked character behavior, all of this breaks the original concept. And instead of complex morality, we get a different, but now unambiguous perspective. Now, after we've met all the main characters, we're introduced to Ellie. And in the show, this is done differently. The context is completely changed, apparently to deepen the narrative. But here's the question. Why show Ellie tied up? In the game, she's introduced differently, as a regular kid, bold and worried about Marlene. Here though, she's restrained for weeks. They're checking to see if she'll turn infected. But what's the point of this at all? In the game, there's intrigue. We don't find out right away that she's immune, and it comes as a surprise both to the player and to Joel. And probably something like that would have even been in the game. Well, with all this 2-week quarantine stuff. But maybe not. Considering that Ellie tries to take care of Marlene when she sees her wounded, again, this is context for the sake of context, which breaks the characterization of Ellie and her behavior as well. And I have a question. If Tommy is in contact with Joel and he knows that somewhere there is a normal life, there's Jackson, which is much cleaner and safer than Boston, this QZ. Why did he even live there? For what reason? In the series, it seems to be hinted that he and Tommy had a falling out because of some terrible things Joel did. But so far, this hasn't been explained to us. Instead, they've already shown that they communicated that Joel was planning to look for him and go after him, which now breaks the image of Joel that the player forms about the character. And here begins a scene that, to be honest, was the least necessary. At the 52nd minute, they show something that, in the game, started earlier. Well, I mean everything that happened before this. In the original, this wasn't shown at all. Suddenly, we're told that Tess had a run-in with some guys who almost killed her. And why? In the game, this was left off screen. And that's how it should be. The most important thing is that in the game, we didn't know what Joel and Tess were to each other. A couple, friends, smugglers. We weren't told anything. And that worked, because it emphasized how detached Joel was from the world. It made the contrast stronger when he started to get closer to Ellie. In the series, Tess comes in and hugs Joel. Before that, she's called his girlfriend. And here's the question, why? Why make their relationship defined? It doesn't add anything. On the contrary, it breaks the foundation of the character. In the game, he was closed off and broken after losing his daughter. He wouldn't have gone looking for his brother, wouldn't have openly mourned Tess, but here it already feels like he's emotionally attached. It feels like the series doesn't know how to develop what was in the game. If the series tries to deepen a character or add a new one, He does it in the most unnatural way possible. The scene where Joel meets Ellie for the first time in the series just looks ridiculous. They aren't introduced, nothing is shown. She immediately lunges at him, almost like she's already infected, not like in the game. Moments like these, when the character is given strange emotions and wildness in her eyes, make viewers develop an aversion to Ellie's appearance as played by Bella Ramsey. Most criticism is about her appearance. Nothing can be done about that now. But that's far from the real problem. Bella knows how to play Ellie when she's given proper scenes. But if a scene is written as if she's a Tasmanian devil, that's how she'll play it, and that's not her fault. And people don't like that. What I don't like is the moment when Joel remembers how a soldier killed his daughter and loses it, beating another soldier to death with his bare hands. And the scene is powerful, no question about it. But why do we need to be shown so explicitly that he's remembering it? It would have been much more powerful if that storyline had been revealed more subtly, not so bluntly, in a more non-linear way. This scene highlights the contrast between Joel and Ellie. For her, the main enemies are the infected. For Joel, it's people. In the series, they kind of try to show this, but Ellie reacts strangely in this scene. She stands off to the side, looking at his face with some kind of unhealthy curiosity, like she's from Fortnite. It's like she doesn't know which emotion to use. Honestly, I don't understand why this adaptation is even necessary. Cinema is cinema. It knows how to tell stories subtly. And to sum up my thoughts on the first episode, I just have to say that the series doesn't improve on or deepen the original. I really don't understand why this adaptation was even necessary. It completely copies the plot, but with a crappy script. Yeah, maybe people simply hadn't really seen anything quite like this before. We mostly saw adaptations of some characters who didn't have any big, complex or intricate stories behind them. But if the story you're adapting already looks and feels like a movie, one that was played out by real people long ago in the past, why would you do the exact same thing, only in a more mediocre, more straightforward and spoon-feeding every possible added aspect kind of way? Next up is the second episode. The first 9 minutes show us a flashback to 2003, to the start of the quarantine. Well, not quarantine actually, but the epidemic. And they explain how all this mess started. The question is, why do we even need this information? What's the point of showing a flashback that takes up 9 minutes out of a 52-minute episode, without really explaining any backstory or characters, but just showing the specifics of this world? Especially since this was in the game too. Ellie asked Joel, what happened to the cities? And he answered that they bombed them, and that was it. It's the same information. But the way it's delivered is completely different. Again, they're trying to reveal the specifics of the cordyceps, but that doesn't matter at all for the series. At least for the second episode, this information is absolutely unnecessary. Now, about the pacing. In the game, after we took out that soldier, actually more than one, snuck past other characters, entered a skyscraper, and made it through tough situations there. But in the series, they didn't care about any of that. They decided that there needed to be a scene where the characters choose to spend the night in one of the buildings, so they can find out how she got bitten and whether she really is immune. In the game, the hotel scene was moved to the beginning of the second episode. And essentially the difference is that at that point, Ellie and Joel were already on their own, and they had to learn how to interact with each other independently. But here, Tess is still alive and well. However, Joel still doesn't want to tell Ellie what kind of relationship he has with her. And why is that? We're shown a much more open version of Joel, but at the same time, he treats Ellie much worse than he does everyone else. Almost with some kind of hatred I don't even know. In the game, Joel treated everyone the same, except maybe he was a bit more favorable toward Tess. And of course, if she had died in the series, it wouldn't make sense for him to tell a girl he barely knows about his relationship with her. Plus, in the game, we already know what their relationship is like, so revealing it to the player or to Ellie is basically the same thing. But someone watching the series already understands what kind of relationship Joel and Tess have. Tess is still alive, so Joel doesn't have any additional trauma about it, nor could he. He ignores her questions anyway, and simply because, just because. And if we talk about the difference between the characters, in the game Ellie would sometimes explode, that spark of rebellion would flare up in her. But it was always like this. You never found her annoying, because she always reacted passionately but appropriately, like a teenager confronted with the injustice of the world or seeing something new. Then, a couple of minutes later, they show us that the infected are connected into a single network. Step on a vine here, and a couple of kilometers away, someone will wake up. Here's the question, how does that even work? According to the creators, this is more realistic than spores. Like, spores are hard to implement, they'd be everywhere, but the mushroom network is a freaking awesome idea. But each infected seems to be on their own, right? Well, they gather in groups, so what? What, do they connect to this network via Bluetooth or something? Or do they return to their spot like a vacuum cleaner going back to its dock? Where's the logic in that? They just got inspired by the fungal system, took a pretty metaphor, and turned it into a flashy mechanic. But it didn't become more realistic. On the contrary, it looks weird. And from the perspective of the world, it's even worse. Ellie's immunity doesn't matter here anymore. Sure, she can protect people, but what about the fungi that grow underground for kilometers? This isn't a virus you can just make a vaccine for. Why even try to make the show more realistic than the game if it doesn't improve anything and actually just breaks it? Especially if in the second season you're ready to go back to spores. So it wasn't that hard to implement after all, right? In nature, fungal mycelium really does exist. It can transmit chemical signals. The truth is, it's actually quite slow. There really can't be any sort of instant reaction. It can't be like sending a command like, oh, that's it. We need to move there. There's definitely danger. Run that way. It's more like just passing along information about some changes. And it could be anything. And the infected aren't connected to each other in any way on their own. They're all separate organisms, at least in the game. They shouldn't react like a herd of animals. That immediately breaks everything they were trying to build. By doing this, they devalue the concept of her immunity and introduce a new way for the infected to communicate, which, if I'm not mistaken, is only used about 3 times in the entire story. Why is it presented this way? Seriously? If Pedro Pascal didn't want to wear the mask, they could have just minimized the amount of time spent with spores, made them appear, well, 2 or 3 times throughout the whole series because there aren't that many of them in the game either. Especially since you're already cutting out entire levels and turning them into a couple of completely unnecessary scenes, do it right. Cut down the screen time of things that don't fit your show or its overall concept. Let him put on the mask twice per season, but the rest of the time they move through locations where the spores can't harm them. I don't think spores are such a difficult thing to implement. Yes, they have their own unique particle physics. If it was done in the game, then it could have been done in the show as well. It's not something that requires incredibly precise rendering, because no matter how you do it, it's going to look at least decent anyway. If we're just talking about air density, and not scenes where there are thick clouds of spores. Even in the first season of Stranger Things, despite its small budget, they had something like that. Then, at the 32nd minute, there's the museum scene. Tess and Joel realize that the person they found was a clicker, while Ellie seems to have no idea who that is. But how could someone who has lived for 20 years in a quarantine zone, studied at school, and was preparing to become a soldier not know what a clicker is? Then, when they're moving from rooftop to rooftop in the game, Tess pulls Joel back because he's lost in thought and we don't know what. But I think everyone understands he's probably thinking about either his own child or Ellie in whom he saw something, and Tess pulls him back like, hey, what's with you? Focus on the task. Don't think about getting attached to her. This again highlights their in-game relationship and shows his detachment from the world. In the series, they did it differently. Now Joel and Tess discuss that after the second bite, she might be infected, and Tess reacts as if to say, Joel, what's wrong with you? Be positive, believe in the best, and anyway, just go. Keep an eye on her. Because in the series plot, she has already been bitten. And that's the problem. You decided to adapt the game, you're making a TV series where you don't really have major time constraints. The only possible issues might be budget related. But come on, it's HBO, they can afford anything. The question arises, why mix up important scenes? Change the messages, alter the characters' states, change the underlying ideas, and end up with yet another mediocre product that does nothing to enhance the original and looks more like a fan-made re-edit of the game. And it would be one thing if you could chalk it up to needing to make the series more dynamic. No, the series completely lost its momentum in every moment where it mattered. Bravo. Plus now Tess's death in the series looks much more pretentious than it did in the game. There, it was restrained, not for show. We don't even really see how she dies. It was all in Joel's spirit, silently, without hysteria, just as a fact. But here, everything is dramatized to the maximum. Instead of soldiers, there are infected, a fungal network, a bizarre kiss that makes no sense at all, and a lighter that references Uncharted, the same one Drake had in the movie Adaptation. It's a nice touch, but it just looks like it was added for the sake of a reference. And now, about an important line. In the game, Joel says twice that they're just lucky. It's kind of a setup. And then when Tess says, we couldn't be lucky forever. That's like the punchline, the narrative chord. You're like, that's it. With this, she's letting them know that she's been infected. In the series, Ellie doesn't ask any questions and Joel doesn't answer them. And in fact, this line isn't spoken at all. Tess says it, and that's it. And now this line is just left hanging in the air. There's no build-up, no meaning. It's just a nice-sounding line. And that's disappointing, because the scene is supposed to be important, but they lost all the little details that made it powerful in the game and decided to do their own thing instead. But then again, nothing new. At this point, I already had a clear feeling that both the pacing and the focus of the plot were slipping, as well as the faithfulness to what was in the game. Very little of what was in the game is actually preserved. And even though I said a lot of unflattering things about the first episode earlier, at least there they really tried to do something well. They tried to flesh out the story better or present familiar moments in a new way. And there was no sense that things were being cut down. On the contrary, it felt like the narrative was expanding because they added a lot of things. Even if I didn't always like it, at least it set the show apart from the game. Now the second episode just feels like a montage, just some wild editing of the game and an attempt to cram a significant part of the game into a short 50-minute episode. Now the third episode, a lot of people don't like it, I would say most people, but probably everyone who's reasonable actually enjoyed it. Simply because this is the most interesting storyline. It's well told, cohesive, gripping, and touching. And even the second time around it still looks interesting, so I won't criticize anything related to Frank and Bill. These are completely different characters, with barely similar habits. And Frank wasn't even in the game at all. There, he's just a hanging corpse. I'd rather talk about the moments where the show messed up again, just for a moment. Actually, I thought I wouldn't say anything about the third episode's performance, because nothing really happens. But then I watched it again, and at the 10-minute mark, Ellie finds an infected person and, for some reason, cuts open his head in a weird way, trying, I guess, to study him. Then she kills him. Again, this kind of unhealthy fascination with the infected and violence is just not typical of Ellie from the game. And then comes the important scene where Ellie finds some pads and puts them in her backpack. Oh, and then, a few minutes later, there are shots that were clearly made just to please the fans, ones we once saw in concept art with the crashed airplane. Honestly, it's just a scene for the sake of having a scene. Basically, it's one of those dialogues that has no real impact on the plot and, in the game, happens during gameplay rather than in a cutscene. But at the end, there's a scene that, at first glance, seems insignificant and appears to add nothing, but in reality, it's very important. Ellie finds a pistol, which she steals from Bill's house. You might ask, why is this important? Because in the game, their relationship was different. They actually knew Bill. Bill acted like a jerk towards her. That's why, when she was rummaging through his things, looking at some magazine, she was showing typical teenage rebellion towards him, trying to get on his nerves. But stealing a gun from someone whose story you just learned, whose story ended so dramatically, and especially after Joel told you not to do it, that's just strange and wrong. But why that is, will only become clear in the next episode. And now it's worth making a brief lyrical digression about the Last of Us series, which, unlike the game you bought and play through entirely, you have to watch one episode at a time because they only release one episode at a time, or you have to wait until the whole thing is out. Sometimes releasing just one episode at a time makes a series more interesting because you can come up with theories, discuss them with friends, predict the plot, or do something else along those lines. But none of that is necessary when it comes to the plot of The Last of Us, because it's a game that's simply meant to have an impact on you, and that's it. It's a story you have to live through. That kind of release structure just doesn't suit it. Still, the creators don't care about that either, because the second season of the show is going to be an even less complete story, since it will only cover part of the plot from the second game. The fourth episode opens with a scene where Ellie is playing with the gun she stole. And I really don't like this moment for several reasons. First of all, the Ellie from the game would never have done anything like that because she had already been taught how to shoot and knew how to use a gun. For her, it's not just some random thing, it's not a toy. Secondly, no one was planning to trust her with a weapon before that. In the show, there was a scene where she picks up a gun lying on the ground and kills a man who attacked Joel. She hadn't kept any weapons before that. She only used one when it was absolutely necessary. And secondly, in the game, this was the scene where trust finally began to form between Joel and Ellie because Ellie's life started to depend on Joel. Plus, there was an important scene after that where it was hard for him to say thank you for her saving him. Because, let me remind you, in the game he's a hardened guy, and even little things like that are a problem for him, especially since he's not open to new people. And thirdly, why is this a problem? Because in the game, Ellie didn't act like a child. Throughout the whole game, she behaved like an adult. The only moments where she might have seemed even a little bit like a child were with Henry, who is actually a couple of years younger than her. This is important because at a certain point in the game's story, there's a moment when it seems like she completely stopped being a child altogether. But we'll talk about that too when we get to it. Then 5 minutes later, they show a scene where Joel is hard of hearing in one ear. This is a small setup for a scene we'll also discuss later. And then Joel says, "You have to live for your family." God, that's not Joel at all. In the game, he would never say something like that. He would just mutter something like, "We're just surviving with no purpose, no meaning, just living day to day." In the game, he didn't even try to look for Tommy. Yeah, he really did worry about him, and he missed him a lot, but he didn't travel across the whole country just to see him. But in the show, he's all about family, feelings, caring, I have to. That's already a different character. And that's the main problem with the show. Joel here isn't just that detached guy knocked down by life. In the game, he was closed off, traumatized, cut off from the world. He didn't need saving from someone, but from himself. His relationship with Tess is more complex in the game. It's ambiguous, we don't fully understand what they have. But here, everything is clear. She's like family, Tommy is family, Ellie is a burden. Everything is put into neat boxes. This simplifies his arc and Joel as a whole. He's no longer someone you want to dig deeper into. He's just a guy who needs to find his loved ones. It's, well, honestly much poorer than in the original, And once again, the show doesn't try to surprise the player or reveal the character. It just bluntly shows what's about to happen. It shows us a pile of burned bodies. They show that some situation is about to happen, some problem arises, the tension builds, and the viewer immediately understands what's going on. But in the game, there was a completely different scene, where Joel simply saw a man pretending to be sick and immediately realized what was happening. And then, a bit later, they explained to us that it was because he understood, since he had been on both sides of the barricade. So in the game, with just a couple of lines, they reveal both Joel's experience and the fact that he had to do terrible things to survive. And now, here is that very scene where Ellie shoots a guy, which they completely changed and, as I mentioned, moved from the hotel. A whole group of people attacked Joel, and one of the guys tried to choke him. The difference from the game is that in the game, it was just another bandit who simply posed a threat. But in the series, they tried to humanize him, to make him into some kind of character. I don't understand why. Because this person had just almost killed Joel. And he didn't become more human or interesting just because he's a kid. They show like, I can't feel my legs. And I just have a question. When he attacked, when he was choking someone, did he even think about the possible consequences of his actions? So am I supposed to feel some kind of sympathy for him after that? And of course, it's clear that this is about survival. But why was that even necessary? The big problem with the series is that it tries to further deepen moments that do not need it at all, while ruthlessly cutting out everything that should have been kept to develop the relationship between the main characters. And then they insert a scene where Joel cold-bloodedly kills a teenager. But we don't see it, we just hear it. He just kills a young teenager, someone they had just tried to humanize for the audience. But why? Is it really to show his complexity? To show that he's a monster? What's the point of that? In the game, things like this were often revealed in small, subtle dialogues. He would never intentionally hurt a kid like that without having some kind of real reason. The kid is already down. He can't walk. He can't do anything to you at all. Why does he kill him? Just so people would hate him. Is that why you wrote this scene? And in the game, there were only a couple of such killings, cutscenes that appeared to be cold-blooded, but which the player could completely understand in the moment. Here, as a viewer, I honestly have no idea why this was necessary at all. And so I'm saying that this is an attempt to make the ending less clear-cut, but not by revealing the character's motives, but by making Joel into a monster. And this is already far beyond simple survival. And really, the presence of this scene here doesn't serve any purpose at all. If in the game this scene served as a bridge between Joel and Ellie, necessary for building trust between them, then in the series it's just a scene where Ellie shoots a person. Joel says, "You're a kid, you shouldn't be killing. And at your age, all of this, you shouldn't have to deal with it." And again, this really contradicts the game at this point, where he never emphasized the fact that she was a child. He never did that throughout the game, up to this point, and not without reason. There was a very important moment with David, in which he acknowledged the child in her. That is, before that, he even acted as if she were an adult. It was not typical for him to take the time to teach her or to treat her in any way like a child. But this is a new character. And he was created to be hated. Apparently, this was done to give more depth to Henry and Sam. Like, look, this is who they're running from. This is who's hunting them. But why? It's another attempt to make the world less black and white, like in The Last of Us Part 2. But there they try to show that the enemies aren't just enemies, that they're people with their own stories, that they have motives. The difference is that the second part of the game was written with this approach from the start, and it often affects the gameplay, where enemies call each other by name, shout, and worry about each other. But for most of these NPCs, no real backstory was ever written. There they had major, well-developed characters for that purpose, who were developed throughout the entire story. But here, what's the point? Why give a backstory to a character who only appears briefly, just to die? This once again takes time away from the main characters. In the first part of the game, the point of these minor characters was different. They were supposed to show us a world that doesn't deserve to be saved. They were supposed to be NPCs who fundamentally want to kill us, the player character. That's enough to create a conflict between the player and the ultimate goal of saving the world, or saving the girl. And for the first part, that's certainly more than enough. Trying to write out every character who plays even a minor role in the story, just to see them killed off 30 minutes later, while conveying the same idea the game already delivered without that character, is simply an attempt to discuss topics that should be addressed in the second season, because the games are supposed to have fundamentally different moods. Then Joel says, "This is my fault, I'm sorry." In the game, Joel couldn't say, "I'm sorry." He was actually the guy whose life was being saved. He understands that. Yet he still acts like a jerk, barely managing to force out something that only vaguely resembles an apology. He tries to show his gratitude through actions, and his sorry never came out directly. Here, they removed that scene, rearranged it, and came up with a new one, but with the same meaning. And they made Joel apologize. Again, they made it softer. I honestly don't even know why anymore. You literally just made him out to be the biggest scumbag. In the game, after the killing, Ellie is the opposite. She's strong-willed, assertive. Look, Joel, I saved him. Just say thank you. But here, the child is in tears. The relationship between them is completely different. And then Ellie says that this isn't the first time she's killed someone. Apparently, that's a hint about Riley. But as far as I remember, in the game, we only learned about Riley at the end, and she doesn't use it as a shield or as an attempt to seem grown up. She simply explains why she has to sacrifice herself. Then, in the series, Joel teaches Ellie how to use a gun, even though she already shows that she knows how to do everything. And then, for some reason, Joel asks, "Where did you learn that?" To which she replies, "Fedra?" He's like, "Well, that makes sense." And then he continues teaching her. Oh. She already knows how to shoot. So the scene isn't about teaching, nor is it about humor. So what is this scene about? In the game, at this point, Ellie is nearly an adult. She's been trusted with a weapon. People are starting to take her seriously. In the series, she's still a kid who was recently playing with a gun as if she was dreaming of pulling the trigger. Now they're giving her a weapon and she's happy about it, as if it's a toy, not the tool she used at the start of the episode to injure a guy so badly he lost feeling in his body. That's insane. In this context, the scene where she takes the gun is a strange transition, as if the character is disconnected from the story. Later, when Joel asks Ellie, "That wasn't your first time," and says something like, "It's unfair that you have to go through all this." Seriously, why did they put this in the middle of the series? In the game, this works as an emotional punch near the end, but here it's like a line that just feels completely out of place. Joel in the series is way too humanized. Self-reflection, caring about Ellie's feelings, lines about how it's unfair to kill, that's not Joel. In the game, he doesn't care almost until the very end. He's ruthless, closed off, and kills without asking unnecessary questions. But here, he's a kind dad who already starts reflecting and worrying by the 4th episode, which ruins his character arc, and the end of the episode is just epic. Sam and Henry sneak up on Joel despite the glass he scattered by the door. And this is Joel, who was paranoid the whole way, suddenly letting his guard down. Brilliant. Next comes the 5th episode, and it turned out to be incredibly filler. You'd think this is already the middle of the series, maybe even a bit further. By now we should be totally in love with these characters, but that just isn't happening. The show once again flirts with new characters, with developing these characters, with deepening the existing ones, and tries to redo what used to work perfectly well without all that. Moving on. A new context regarding Henry. We're told that Henry admits to collaborating with Phaedra, to which Joel responds that he doesn't work with rats. And once again, I have to ask a question I'm tired of repeating. Why was this done if in the end he still works with him and doesn't even make a fuss about it later? Why add these details to their relationship at all? These characters in the game don't even have time to go through any major arc. They are more of an example of what can happen in this world, how a child can die, how an adult might not have the strength to protect them. They are simply people whose presence makes Ellie and Joel's relationship feel different by comparison. It's a kind of contrast between, well, at least the game versions of Ellie and Joel, who are balanced and ready to stand up for each other no matter what. Even though at that point, Joel still wasn't ready to admit that Ellie was important to him. And making Henry in the series someone who is holding a weapon against other people for the first time is just really strange. Plus they made Sam younger. Again, it's unclear why. Because if in the game there was only a couple of years difference between them, in the series it's 6 years. In the game, at this moment, Ellie acts like a child for the first time. She is happy, having fun, interacting with someone who can be called her peer. She forgets how grown up she is and how terrible the world she lives in is. And Sam here is also not portrayed as really little. That was the essence of his character. He is kind of still a child, he's younger than Ellie, but at the same time, he should already be a teenager who wants to seem older. Again, it's a simple, maybe not particularly brilliant, but still an attempt to make the character more interesting just by choosing his age. So, when he would like to take a toy he's not allowed to have, Ellie steals that toy for Sam. Because of this, their relationship becomes more interesting. She tries to do something nice for him. From the start, he is shown as someone who needs that toy. And then he becomes someone who doesn't need anything anymore, because he's been bitten, because he has very little time left to live, and all that matters to him now is the life that's about to end. That's the kind of harsh coming of age that happens in the world of The Last of Us. But in the series, this was simply cut out, and that cool visual subtext was missing. Now this is finally awesome. This is the very scene everyone was waiting for. The sniper, the running, the tension, the infected, everything's there. There aren't really any issues here. The scene is well done, but now comes my least favorite scene in the whole series. This is the moment when the massacre has literally just ended. And here Ellie and the kid are reading comics, just sitting there as if nothing had just happened. And if you haven't played the game, you still don't know that he was bitten. And yes, here the younger one himself, and you can tell that he's a bit distracted after the bite, but he looks too calm. Before this, he was active, asking for food, asking questions, trying to express himself, and now he's just silent, as if nothing happened. And then, as if scripted, the scene begins, a dialogue from the game, now through sign language. He shows Ellie the bite and she can't do anything about it, but she tries to smear her blood on it, like maybe it'll help. In the game, this moment was actually really powerful. At first we were kept in the dark, then there was a sudden shift, tension, it was quick and harsh. But here, the scene is drawn out, with a naive attempt to save him with her blood. And most importantly, Ellie doesn't tell Joel, doesn't try to change anything. In the game, she couldn't do anything, she just didn't know. But here she knows and stays silent. This is just another example of childish behavior, not the Ellie we knew. It all could have been presented differently. She could have told Joel, they could have tried to do something together, and the scene would still have been tragic, but it would have looked more honest and realistic, which is supposedly what they were always trying to achieve. And in the end, it just feels like the characters acted like idiots. That's it. I have absolutely no problem with the boy not speaking here. No, in a way, it's actually kind of cool to see something like that in a world like this. But I still have this unspoken question. Why was this done? What are you trying to say with this? Because I actually like the dialogue in the game more. I like watching the character look out the window. I like seeing how everything around him faded, how the childlike spark disappeared from his eyes. It was unsettling to watch him lose interest in that toy. It was both unsettling and, in its own way, beautiful. But now, in the series, it's just unsettling and stupid. Episode 6 is already more than half of the show's plot, and in fact more than half of the game's plot as well. But the thing is, these 5 episodes felt like a much less eventful, much less interesting story. And on top of that, with all its attempts to explain everything, it ends up being an even emptier story, so let's not beat around the bush. Now let's look at specific scenes where they completely wasted the potential. First of all, they decided to give Joel panic attacks, actually a couple of them. I get that they've already made Joel a much softer person, but at the same time, he seems very contradictory, because he's actually quite brutal, judging by what we've seen earlier. I just don't understand yet what's the point of this particular panic attack and what are they trying to say with it. We've already realized that the characters here are more sensitive and open. A bit later, Ellie admits to Joel that she knew about Sam's bite and Joel just doesn't react to it at all. That's very strange. Why let the character realize that Sam was bitten if you don't want to develop it into a dialogue, if you don't want to do anything with it? The funny thing is, in the game, some time also passes after the funeral. Ellie comes up to Joel and asks him, "What should I do with the toy?" She says she forgot to leave it at his grave. She can't get Joel to have an emotional conversation. He's still closed off to her, despite everything that's happened before. And even though he has started to trust her with his life, he's still not ready to open up emotionally out of weakness, especially considering that you already have a much more open character, and the bond between them is already much closer. Considering that Joel cares about the fact that Ellie is a child and that she simply shouldn't have to go through all this, he could have said a few words to her. He could have not just stayed silent, but commented on her attempt to save Sam. Otherwise, I just don't understand why this change was made. Why is it that in this particular case, when it's convenient for you, Joel behaves similarly to how he did in the game? But when it's inconvenient, he becomes a completely different person. He really switches between emotions and personalities. Sometimes he's the character from the game, and other times he's the character from the show. When then, a bit later, when they've already reached Tommy's dam, Joel asks Ellie to behave more modestly. And again, it might seem like a small thing, almost worth making a separate section about. It really seems like it doesn't matter at all, but the Joel from the original game never acted like that, not even once. Yes, he could say something like, "Come on, don't mess with Bill." He might have pulled her out of a conflict, so to speak, but he never asked her to behave differently. He didn't try to educate her, he didn't try to control her. And when we finally meet David a bit later in the game, he's portrayed as being completely different from Joel. He comes across as a truly distinct person, with entirely different motives and a completely different attitude toward Ellie herself. And to be honest, this is yet another deeply messed up detail that makes the adaptation of The Last of Us just downright awful. A bit later, we're also told that apparently Maria is going to have a baby. I least of all understand why this was necessary, because you'll have to deal with it somehow in the second season, which is about to start. You'll have to make it so that this somehow affects the story, that it influences Tommy's attitude toward what will happen, that it impacts his actions, his willingness to risk himself. And this should have a huge impact on the ending of the show's second season. Because in the game, if such changes had happened, everything could have turned out completely differently. But here I can't criticize something that hasn't happened yet. But I'm sure that most likely nothing positive will come out of this. It's just a change for the sake of change. A couple of minutes later, Joel has his second panic attack again. We're reminded once more that he's old, frail, and basically incapable of anything, just so that in the end it doesn't affect anything either. After that, a scene begins that, to be honest, I hate. And it's not that it's badly acted, or that the dialogues are poorly written. No, its main problem is that it exists at all. And in this episode, the most important scene in the game is supposed to happen. Well, okay, maybe not the most important, but in my opinion, it's one of the most important. This is the moment when Ellie runs away from Joel at the ranch, and he has to go look for her. When she does this because she realizes that Joel wants to hand her over to Tommy. Moreover, earlier in the game, we were shown a scene where Tommy understands that Ellie has become like a daughter to Joel, and he realizes this before Joel is ready to admit it to himself. Ellie's desire to run away after she risks losing yet another close person, not because he might die, but simply because he doesn't want to get attached to people, seems completely justified. For the first time in the entire game, she acts completely against logic, against her mature character, and, in a way, even recklessly runs away from Joel so that they can have an important conversation, to tell him what he means to her, and to hear the same from him. And for this scene to be so powerful and emotionally charged, there shouldn't have been any similar moments between the characters before this. They weren't supposed to bare their souls to each other. We weren't supposed to fully understand what was going on with Joel. He wasn't supposed to be overly emotional. And now we return to this scene. In the series, for some reason they insert a moment where Joel once again complains that he's old, that he can't protect her. Yet another baseless whining from Joel. He's all caught up in his feelings, but not the ones he should be having. He doesn't look like someone who could still have a future. But in the game, that's exactly what he is. A man who hasn't really lived, just survived. And only next to Ellie does he get a chance to truly live. With her, he doesn't so much find redemption as he finds a way to cope with his trauma. And this attempt in the series to ground Joel, to give him illnesses, self-reflection, and add a few years to his age just breaks the character. In the game, he was 52 years old, but in the series, they made him older. He complains to Tommy that he couldn't do anything when the dog was sniffing Ellie or when Henry pointed a gun at him, but in both cases, he physically couldn't have done anything. It all happened in a matter of seconds. It was just shock, even for him, an experienced survivor. But Joel in the game wouldn't have started digging so deeply into himself. He needs a reason to open up. That's his essence. But here, he comes to Tommy himself, completely broken, and on top of that, they removed the scene where Ellie runs away. They just moved it to this room in Jackson. The scene is the same, but the meaning is no longer the same. The point of this scene was that it's hard for Joel to admit that Ellie has become important to him, that he has parental feelings for her, that he's ready to fight for her. In the game, it was subtle, a break in his voice, just brilliantly performed by Troy Baker.
You are treading on some mighty thin ice here.
I'm sorry about your daughter, Joel, but I have lost people too.
You have no idea what loss is.
Everyone I have cared for has either died or left me. Everyone fucking except for you. So don't tell me that I would be safer with someone else, because the truth is I would just be more scared.
You're right. You're not my daughter. And I sure as hell ain't your dad.
He spoke for himself. Joel is on the edge. He can't say it directly. But the player understood everything, and the whole attempt to expand the world, to show Jackson, to add everyday life, disrupts the pacing. These important moments lose their weight when Joel finally decides to go with Ellie. In the game, it was touching. He needed time to realize it. While they were returning from the ranch to Jackson, Joel had time to think over what had happened. He's not ready to talk about it yet. He's just ready to move forward. And after this scene, the relationship between Joel and Ellie changed forever. They became closer to each other. Joel stopped distancing himself from her as if she were just a daughter, and they finally started to grow closer and have heartfelt conversations. In the series, however, Joel changed his mind from not wanting to go with Ellie to agreeing to go with her simply after a night had passed. A night in Jackson. They added a huge pause in their story, giving Joel a lot of time to think, and I have no problem with that. Okay, they changed the concept. Fine, let it be that way. Let them talk here. Let the scene itself no longer carry the same weight. The thing is, we already know what's going on in Joel's head. They just hammered it into us that he's old and weak, that he can't protect her, that he's afraid and unable to protect her, so his agreeing to go with her, given his fears, just seems illogical. And the character's physical weaknesses only serve to harm their relationship in the series. And then, when they finally reach the university, Joel tells her, "Well, you know, I thought about it and I don't want to raise sheep. I'd like to be a singer." But before that, when she asked him, "What would you like to do?" he said he wanted to raise sheep. Well, I'd like to raise sheep. And why was it necessary to add that at that moment? Why try to deepen their relationship earlier than necessary? Especially since he lied to her. Or do you want to show that back then he told her one thing, and now, when he's truly open, he tells her something else? Honestly, it's just straightforward and ridiculous. And probably the second important scene that they completely messed up in this episode is the university scene. Overall, this episode by itself is just awful if you break down the scenes individually. But the university part is just rock bottom. In the game, it's a fall from a height of about 4 or 5 meters, rebar in the back, and everything looks brutal, painful, and terrifyingly dangerous. This is a moment where Joel could actually die, where his life is truly at risk. In the show, it's just a little knife, just a small ordinary knife, some random guy with a short blade. And Joel couldn't handle him. And yeah, on the one hand, that kind of makes sense. We were just told that he's half dead, that he has anxiety, panic attacks, he practically sees himself in the grave already. And considering everything we've been told about him, honestly, it seems like he wouldn't have survived such a wound. But the main point isn't the injury itself. The main thing is, why was it needed in the game? It wasn't just, oh, he got hurt. It was the moment when Ellie takes everything upon herself, when she shows her character, drags him, shoots back, saves him. She helps him survive, and not just physically, she tries to help him find the strength to go on internally. In the series, this is given 2 minutes of attention. Everything is done just in passing. There's absolutely no tension, no sense of danger, really no growth, nothing. And when you actually play this moment yourself, when you're controlling Joel while Ellie is trying to pull him out, while she's screaming and swearing at him, you really live through this moment. In the series, they just fed you a scene where Joel falls off the horse as if that would be enough for you. That's the difference between the game and the series. They have almost the same plot, but completely different scripts, completely different delivery, and the emphasis is placed in totally different ways. And in the series, it's very, very hard to find something that's done better than in the game. From the start, the idea of adapting a game into a TV series just doesn't make any sense, because you end up cutting the story's runtime almost in half. And the gameplay moments that you cut out, because it's a series now, not a game, should be replaced with something, but you don't replace them with anything. You present important plot scenes simply as dry facts. And let's talk about the 7th episode right away before we start breaking down the scenes. The problem is that in the original, this was actually DLC. It was originally designed as additional content, and it was intentionally and deliberately cut from the main game to create dynamics, intrigue, and then, a bit later after the playthrough, to show something the player had already guessed. This is the story about how Ellie took care of Joel. And in the context of the game, it works perfectly because first you play through the main story, then you learn about Riley at the end, and then you play the DLC where you spend 50% of the time with her and the other 50% searching for medicine for Joel. But in the series, it's just the 7th episode, and that's it. From a dramatic standpoint, it feels like a filler episode. Yes, I understand why they put it here specifically. They needed to keep the story linear to show what was happening while Joel was lying there wounded. Making this episode the 9th would have been silly, considering the specifics of the series. Plus, for some reason, they added another storyline about rationing in the show. Like, some of them are being trained by Fedra to be commanders and others for security. And they tell Ellie that she has a great future ahead of her, while Riley gets assigned to some crappy job. And that's it. It didn't affect the story at all. I just don't understand why this was necessary because it doesn't strengthen the characters or the conflict. It was simpler in the game. There are 2 friends. One joins the Fireflies, the other continues her studies. They have different views, and in the game that was enough. Here, everyone tries to make things more complicated, but there's really no point to it. This is one of those things a screenwriter should think through, but doesn't have to explain or show. Now let's go through the scenes. At the 30th minute, they take photos in a booth, and they even manage to print them out. That wasn't in the game. There, everything had already dried up like it had been 300 years. And the point wasn't the result, but the moment itself. It was an impulse to do something truly human, childishly silly, and touching because of that. But here, they just pressed a button, got their photos, and moved on. It's as if the main thing is that you have a piece of paper left, not the memory itself. Later, Ellie plays an arcade machine. And in the game, she couldn't. The machine was broken. And that's exactly why that moment was so special. Riley narrated what was happening on the screen, and Ellie imagined it all in her mind. It was a game of imagination, of trust. It's a very intimate and quiet scene. The camera stays on her face the whole time, she's pressing the buttons, and we see how she gets lost in the moment, how she imagines herself inside the game. And at some point we even start to hear the sounds from the game and see the light from the arcade machine, even though it isn't really there. If you try to explain the difference between the game and the series with a single example, this scene with the arcade machine from the flashback is the best one to use. That's exactly how the whole series feels. It's like they did the same thing, but worse. And then there's this storyline about Riley now being with the Fireflies against Fedra. But why is that necessary? In the game, she came to the mall simply because she wanted to spend time with Ellie. She didn't have any hidden motives, no missions. But here, it's as if her behavior needs to be justified, as if just coming to say goodbye isn't enough. This makes Riley less kind, less sincere, and in my opinion, only ruins the original story. Later they dance in masks to music. It's the music that attracts the infected. But the thing is something else. They cut out the scene with the water guns, and that was an important moment. The water guns were another thoughtful gesture from Riley. Another, I love you, but shown through actions, not words. First, they devalue the very fact that she brought Ellie to the mall at all. And then they also cut the moment where she simply makes her happy, plays with her, jokes around, and gets closer to her. After that comes the scene with the kiss. Yes, it's here too, but in the game, everything built up gradually. You understood why Ellie couldn't forget her. But in the show, it's just a kiss, and that's it. The moment is there, but the emotions aren't. And this is despite the fact that this episode lasts longer than the corresponding part in the game, where everything was intertwined. Ellie was simultaneously taking care of Joel in one mall, and remembering how she lost Riley in another. It was a powerful parallel. 2 losses, 2 solitudes, and 2 choices. They simply removed that. Instead, there's just one flashback, everything in one location, everything direct. It's not hard for me to believe that they love each other, that there are feelings between them. But in the series, it's presented far too straightforwardly. They tell us, but show us almost nothing. But in the original, not only did they show it, they made you feel it through the details, through the dynamics, through the passage of time. In the game, Joel was injured in the fall, and Ellie was taking care of him in the winter. So time had passed, you could feel it, you could see it in the change of seasons, the change of location, in her state. But here, none of that is present. Ellie just seems to have appeared in some house, she hasn't gone anywhere, hasn't experienced anything, time doesn't feel like it's passing, there's zero context. So in the end, the episode seems long, but actually says much less than the DLC. Where in the game you get everything in 2 hours, emotions, gameplay, development, here they just retell it to you. They try to deepen the story by tying Riley to the Fireflies, but it doesn't add anything at all. Neither Phaedra nor the Fireflies become any more fleshed out. Everything is flat and straightforward, just like the rest of this series. Even the episode title, Left Behind, is a play on words. In the context of The Last of Us, it's not just about being abandoned or left behind. It has several meanings at once. First of all, it's about the people Ellie has lost. This is the emotional burden she now carries with her. Secondly, it's about the structure itself. This is a part of the story that was previously left behind the scenes, the piece that wasn't in the main game. And thirdly, it's simply a metaphor for loss, about what you can't take with you, about what remains. The structural part of the title is now unrelated to the series, and that's the strength of the original. The title says a lot without spelling everything out directly. Actually, it's the same with the main plot. Unfortunately, the show's creators have problems with exactly this. They just can't convey the idea through subtext, through emotion, without direct dialogue, flashbacks, and explanations. Okay, now about episode 8. Here it's already harder to talk about, because on the one hand, they actually did some things really well, but at the same time still managed to mess some things up. First of all, what did they do better? They showed us David right away, along with the whole community that depends on him. And it's not just some guys with guns who are chasing us in the game. There are women, there are children, there are ordinary people. This gives him more depth, he gets a motivation, and for the first time in the whole series, they actually tried to add some moral grayness, and they did it through a simple scene without breaking the logic of the original. That's already progress. But then the problems start. In the game, at this point, we didn't even know if Joel was alive, because Left Behind didn't exist yet. After the university, it's immediately winter, and Ellie is out hunting. That was powerful. You don't know what's happened to Joel, you don't know where he is, and you're worried about him. And even if you're playing for the second time, the tension still works. In the show, they spent almost 7 minutes developing David. Okay, that's useful, but they just blew the suspense with Joel. And essentially, the suspense around David himself as well. Because in the game, when we first meet him, we know nothing about him. He says he has a community, that there are people who depend on him. He's polite, calm, we talk to him, and he helps Ellie. And even in a linear game, it works. You start to doubt, to wonder whether to trust him or not. That makes the scene feel alive. You're personally involved. In the series, they show us he has a community, he's the leader, and at the same time, he immediately comes across as untrustworthy. Plus, they add a religious undertone, which in film is almost always unsettling by itself. You immediately sense something's off. And now the campfire scene. And this scene, which in the game we didn't get right away, is similar to the moment where David admits to Ellie that he knew who she was and that he was looking for her and Joel. But in the game, by that point, we had already been through a lot together with David. We fought side by side against the infected, defended ourselves, survived, and because of that, some kind of trust gradually started to form. What's cool is that at the same time, the distrust remained. There was a balance. Ellie still noticed that he might be lying to her, that he had his own hidden motives, and you start to doubt it along with her. To trust or not to trust. This reflected her character and showed her intelligence. In short, the whole scene happens too early. No doubts, no development, nothing like that. And then David tells Ellie that some crazy man with a girl killed someone. In the game, he says this too, but it's much more vague, without specifics. In the series, he already calls the murdered man the girl's father, just says it outright. And here's where the problem arises. In the game, we were moving through Pittsburgh, where we met Henry and Sam, where there were lots of bandits. Then we ran into different groups a couple more times. Maybe it was all the same gang. We didn't know that, and that just made it more interesting. After that came University, where we bumped into someone again. There, the chain of events made sense. Even if you don't remember the exact sequence, it still feels logical. In the series, they changed everything. And in this new version, when they suddenly personalize the murder, you're like, who even is this guy? We haven't even seen him. Although, apparently, he was the very guy who stabbed Joel. But if you want the viewer to believe that these people have a reason to seek revenge, try not just adding context, but personalizing the character a bit. Like with that crazy lady who was chasing the brothers. Only there it didn't make sense, but here, at least it would have given something. Against this backdrop, you realize how important gameplay is in the original game. In the series, where there is none, the pacing, tension, and sense of threat drop. Maybe the gameplay in The Last of Us wasn't revolutionary, but it was polished to the smallest detail and worked perfectly for the story. You experienced every scene not just as a viewer, but as a participant. But in the series, this was simply cut out. Not shortened, but cut out entirely, replaced with scenes that feel alien. The game was a cohesive work. There, the story was told both in cutscenes and through action. But here, you're just watching. And I honestly don't understand why they shoved the religious theme in there. Seriously, wasn't it enough that he's a pedophile and a cannibal? Why make him a preacher on top of that? Come on, he's already a complete scumbag. They cut out the chase scene. In the game, it was a big, full-fledged horse chase. Ellie was leading the enemies away, buying Joel some time. There was action, there was energy, you could see that she was capable of fighting back. It really worked for the tension and her character development. In the show, they just cut the chase scene. Ellie rides the horse for about 15 meters. Where to? Why? I don't know. She's riding in circles around the house, or it's just a scene for the sake of it. The horse gets shot, Ellie is captured. That's it, she didn't do anything. She doesn't kill anyone or take any active steps. She just rode off. She gets caught there. And honestly, from the moment she leaves the house and leaves Joel behind to the moment she's captured, it's maybe 10 minutes. And in that time, Joel has already come to and is ready to fight. What did Ellie accomplish? Well, she dragged someone along with her, I guess, but that's about it. The horse was left to die somewhere out there. There's no attachment to it at all, because we never played with it, never had a single scene with it. This horse is just transportation that stopped being useful. I'm emphasizing this point because about 5 minutes later, David tells Ellie that she's a dangerous person, that she's proven it. I'm just curious, how exactly? Was it because she killed a deer? Because she fired a shot into the air? She didn't do anything at all. Literally nothing. Not a single concrete action that would show she's dangerous. Then comes the interrogation scene. And in the game, this is one of the most powerful moments. Everything we've been told about Joel up to this point comes together in this scene. We knew he had done terrible things, we knew what he was capable of to survive. And by this point, we already felt his bond with Ellie. He's ready to tear anyone apart for her. And she's ready to do the same for him. It makes sense, it's well earned. And most importantly, time has passed in the game. He took a long time to recover, Ellie took care of him, autumn turned into winter. And we see it, we feel it, and we believe that he can fight again. We know that he's fine. His knees, his hearing, his hands, everything is okay, and his motivation is just fine too. He's angry, he's going after her, and there's no doubt about it. In the series, Joel was initially shown as weaker and more sensitive. He didn't have time to recover, it got easier for him early on, but only because there was no fall. But he was still seriously injured. And at the same time, he gets up, interrogates, and kills. It kind of works, but it's less believable. Yeah, and emotionally, things aren't as good here. And the main difference is the interrogation scene. In the game, it's genuinely creepy. It really gets to you. In the series, it's just a scene. It's done well enough, but that's it. It doesn't evoke the same feeling as in the game. There, it's fear, brutality, hopelessness, and understanding from the player's side. In the game, this scene is just for a checkmark. Yes, she is, as a matter of fact, most definitely, without any question, alive. She's alive, she's David's newest pet, where? In the town around the 45th minute, the difference between the game and the series becomes especially noticeable. And again, it's because everything is just cut up. They cut out the fight with the infected from the episode, cut out the moment where Ellie runs away and goes through a bunch of dangers, fights, makes her way back, and only after all that ends up in the kitchen where she fights David. In the game, it was a long, tense segment where you, as the player, truly felt everything: the fear, despair, struggle, and survival. In the show, this isn't there. Well, technically it is, but everything is reduced to a minimum. The fact that the show cuts out scenes like this makes it impossible to really feel what's happening. It doesn't feel like an adaptation, but rather like a compilation of fragments. And it becomes clear that the very structure of The Last of Us is impossible to retell in a linear TV format. Even if it were a full-length film with 2.5 hours of runtime, it still wouldn't work, because the point isn't in the sequence of events, but in how you actually experience them. And in this sense, I actually feel closer to the approach they took in the Uncharted adaptation. It didn't try to recreate the game. They made their own version inspired by the game, and it worked on its own terms. The Last of Us series tries to be the game, but without the gameplay. Because the main difference between the game's story and the show's story is that in the game, it's a story about Joel and Ellie, where you live with them, feel with them, play as Joel, and later as Ellie. And the entire focus is on those two. They are The Last of Us. But for some reason, the show goes another way, telling stories of other characters or going deeper into this story where it's not needed. You add new details, but you don't develop them. And as a result, David doesn't become scarier or more interesting. He doesn't evoke the anger we felt toward him in the game. Back then, they achieved this precisely through actions, through gameplay, through the fact that we worried about Ellie while playing as Joel, and vice versa. We experienced it ourselves, and the absence of these parts makes the show feel alien. Because everything that made the story powerful has been cut out. Yes, you could say that the opening scene in the series adds something. It makes David more unambiguous. He's no longer just a weird guy trying to survive as best he can. Now he's a pedophile who enjoys resistance. In his own words, it's as straightforward as it gets. And the problem isn't that it's said, but how it's said, because in the game it was understood without words, without pointing fingers. Another powerful moment is the fight in the dining hall. In the game it was long, sometimes grueling, and it was a real struggle. Either you resisted or you fought for her. In the series, everything was shortened, or she barely resists at all. And finally, the moment when Ellie finishes off David. In the game, it's a very important scene. That's when Joel appears and hugs her, and at that moment the sound fades away, leaving only the music and the scene. It's not about rescue, it's about acceptance. This is the moment when Joel finally becomes a father to her, calling her baby girl, when he doesn't just protect her, but supports her. Because this is the moment when Ellie stops being a child, she loses her composure, and only Joel can bring her back. The game does this subtly and emotionally, but the series ruins all of that. She just walks out of the building like she handled it, and as soon as she sees Joel, she suddenly loses it again and starts hitting him with her fists, as if he has a knife in his hand. And why is there this pause in the tension? Because of these strange decisions, the series turns not into an adaptation, but into a retelling from memory. All the most important things are cut out, everything that could have been explored is left unexplored. Everything that was worth showing is replaced with dialogue. And because of that, it all becomes something it shouldn't be. Let's move on to episode 9. It would be interesting to imagine how it might have ended if this were an original story and not an adaptation. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And it all starts with yet another flashback. And yes, on the one hand, it's cool to see Ashley Johnson, the actress who voiced Ellie in the game, but now she's playing her mother, Anna. And it seems like this scene explains where Ellie's immunity comes from. It shows that Ellie's mother was bitten while giving birth to her, and managed to cut the umbilical cord only after being bitten. Everything looks beautiful. That's the explanation for how the immunity was formed, but the episode is only 43 minutes long, and almost 10 of those are spent on this flashback, this storyline. First, there are almost 5 minutes just for the birth scene, then the opening credits, then another 5 minutes of conversation with Marlene, with Anna, and so on. So that's almost a quarter of the episode, which could have been placed anywhere, but ended up right here, at the very end, and it feels like a wild loss of pacing. At the moment you want to reach the climax, you're suddenly slowed down for some reason. This scene gives us extra information. We better understand who Anna is, why Marlene cares about Ellie, and that Ellie isn't just some girl but the daughter of a close friend. And in this sense, yes, maybe there really was no place for this in the game simply because it would have ruined the pacing, and presenting it differently probably wouldn't have worked. But the problem is that even with all its informativeness, this scene doesn't give us the main thing. It doesn't make the operation feel more justified. Yes, they explained where the immunity comes from, but Marlene and Ellie weren't close. Anna and Marlene were the ones who were close. So the show tries to build emotional drama around this, but it just doesn't seem to work. Ellie doesn't see Marlene as someone important. And this doesn't change even after this scene. Here they tried to recreate the moment from the game when Ellie gets distracted and doesn't respond to Joel's request to help him climb up. And it seems like this scene is there, but it works much less effectively, because in the game it was a powerful moment, a deconstruction of the gameplay. You get used to Ellie responding to every help request. It always works. And then suddenly she just stands there and does nothing. And you don't understand what's going on until you realize how deeply she's withdrawn into herself right now. That's why it's an emotional blow, because the usual gameplay pattern is broken. In the series, she just got distracted. Joel called her, she didn't hear him right away, but then everything goes on as usual. The dialogue continues, the scene goes on. Nothing special happens, and the moment loses all its meaning. When there's no interactivity, you don't feel that system failure, it's just another shot. Next is the scene with the giraffe. Yes, it's there, and it kept a nice detail from the game. The ladder. In the game, you climb up, Ellie suddenly throws down the ladder and runs off, and you don't immediately understand why. You chase after her. You have a few seconds to realize something happened to her, that she saw something. And only then, the giraffe. It was a simple, but very warm and well-built moment of suspense. In the show, you just see the giraffe right away, and that's it. The scene just happens. Again, the lack of interactivity makes it feel flat. But that's not the only problem. The problem is that this moment simply wasn't given a chance to grow. It comes just 7 minutes after the flashback. 7 minutes is all we get from the moment the episode really begins, and that's just not enough. You don't have time to feel what state Ellie is in, or to see how Joel tries to cheer her up. Nothing really has time to build up. In the game, you run through the ruined city, make your way to the bus stop, pass by the destruction, see how Ellie is silent, how she trudges along behind you. You can turn the camera to look at her, and you realize that something inside her is broken. Inside her, like in a child, something is gone forever. And so this scene with the giraffe becomes not just a kind moment, it remains a hope that not everything is lost yet, that she still has some light inside her. And when all of this is cut down, when the walk, the atmosphere, the small actions are removed, when the time is taken away, the scene just turns into a pretty picture without depth, without build-up, without the sense that this is a turning point, a final chord. Just a giraffe, just a smile. And I don't feel anything here. Then comes the scene on the rooftop. Ellie says, after everything I've done, after everything we've been through, but the problem is, I don't feel it. Yes, they've been through something, but what exactly? What did she do? Where are the details? In the game, I felt it because I played as her. I shot enemies, I saved Joel, I made decisions, I survived, I was part of all of it. In the show, I'm just looking at the screen and I don't feel any struggle. I don't feel like she really went through hell. And even if you just rewatch a playthrough of the game, you'll still feel it more, because at least there they show you how she fought. There, you can see what her struggle is about. But in the show, all they do is talk about it. That's it. And all the scenes where her character was actually revealed, where she did something, they were simply cut out. Then Joel tells Ellie that the guy who shot at him and missed was actually himself. In other words, he's hinting that he tried to take his own life. And honestly, that's just surreal. There was nothing like that in the game. Joel wasn't like that in the original. He could be withdrawn, broken, tough, but to actually take a gun and shoot himself? No, that's just not in his character at all. Although, to be fair, I'm not entirely right here. There was a scene in the game where we see a couple who hanged themselves and Ellie says, I guess they took the easy way out. To which Joel replied, believe me, it's not like that. This line hints that he thought about suicide, but it doesn't directly confirm that he was suicidal or that he tried to end his own life. In short, once again, what was left for us to ponder in the game is just spoon-fed to us in the show, already chewed up. And there was also a very intense moment in the show. Ellie and Joel are walking through a tunnel, they fall into the water and almost drown. Ellie passes out and Joel pulls her out and tries to resuscitate her. And then soldiers show up and catch them. Yes, it was a sudden transition. Yes, you could also nitpick the soldiers' logic, but the scene worked. It was a good directorial move. In the show, the soldiers just see a man walking with a child. And first of all, it's once again a trimmed-down, simplified version of the scene from the game, and second, it's just nonsense. The soldiers, who were supposed to be waiting for Ellie's arrival, throw a smoke grenade at them without even trying to understand what's going on. In the next scene, Joel comes to in the hospital. The first thing that caught my eye was how terrible this location looks, especially if you compare it to the original game, which came out back on the PlayStation 3. Well, okay, maybe there would not be any complaints, but if you have seen the PS5 remake, where this scene was visually turned into a masterpiece, the contrast here is really stark. And the hospital in the series is just a poor, shabby, utterly weightless visual copy. Everything that was put into this location in the remake, everything that was felt through the details, the lighting, the color, here it was simply thrown out. And now they let us understand why there was even a flashback at the beginning. Supposedly, it was needed for two things. First, to scientifically justify how Ellie's immunity works. So supposedly the cordyceps somehow managed to integrate into her brain because she was infected at birth, and that's what makes her special. This is meant to make the Firefly's motivations seem more scientific and understandable, because in the game they basically didn't explain anything. But even here, the show doesn't answer the main question. Is this really the only way to make a vaccine? Or were there some alternatives, or did you just decide to kill the child and that's it? The second reason is, again, an attempt to give Marlene some depth to show that she knew Anna, Ellie's mother, and that maybe for her, this is also a loss. But honestly, it doesn't work, because in 14 years, Ellie had absolutely no connection with Marlene. None at all. In the game, they basically met at the beginning, and that was it. And it's the same in the series. Why should I suddenly believe that Ellie is important to her, just because she knew her mother? That she supposedly looked after her or something? Honestly, I was never convinced of that at all. And in the game, by the way, I wasn't convinced either. But at least in the game, they didn't waste so much screen time trying to force it. Here they tried, and failed just as badly. Now, about the knockout. It just isn't there. Here's the scene where Joel is being led out of the hospital. In the game, you can really feel that this is it. This is the moment where the world is split into before and after, where Joel makes his choice, where you as the player go through it with him, where he fights for the person he loves most. And you feel it on a physical level. In the series, there's nothing at all. That's it. Just boom. The doctors. Let's go. People who haven't played the game don't understand what this moment is about. To them, Joel is just a selfish guy who suddenly killed everyone just because he felt like it. In the game, you would have done exactly the same thing yourself. You understand him. And that's the point. Neil Druckmann confirmed this. He's on Joel's side, but the show doesn't convey that. I actually feel like in the series, Joel is made harsher than he was in the game. But at the same time, he's also more sensitive. In the game, he was tough enough, yes, but not without reason. He never killed just for the sake of it. Everyone he took out was threatening him or Ellie. He was defending himself. He was rough but fair. And in the finale, he was just protecting her again. But in the series, he kills almost with a cold fury, and then, 10 minutes later, reflects on how he's weak, how he's broken, how hard it is for him. And this just doesn't fit the character at all. A person who does terrible things, and a person who immediately analyzes and torments himself over those things, and I'll say it again, the game's Joel was a consistently written character with clear motives for his actions. At the 29th minute, the scene begins where Joel shoots the guards. And in the game, this was also an important moment. It wasn't just a cutscene, it was full-fledged gameplay. It was a way for the player to unleash their desire to protect Ellie. You act yourself, you're not just watching, you're participating, and you have the same motives as Joel. You kill not just because the story requires it, but because you want to save her. And that matters. In the series, they just turn on the music, remove the background, create a cinematic moment, and Joel, as if in God mode, simply walks down the corridors and takes out everyone he sees silently, without emotion, with a rifle. And that's not even a tenth of what you can feel in the game, because you're not just watching, you're acting. And that's despite the fact that in the series they try to show him as weak and vulnerable. Again, it just goes against logic. At the 32nd minute, he reaches the operating room where the surgeon is standing. And here, in the game, there was a very subtle moment. Yes, you didn't have a choice. You still kill the surgeon, but you do it yourself. You have the opportunity to stand there, think, and delay the moment a little. You can feel just how difficult and challenging this decision is, even if it's inevitable. In the series, it's just a snap, no pause, just a shot. And he doesn't even hesitate. Everything happens in a couple of seconds. Then Joel, just like in the game, lies to Ellie and, oh, surprise. In the series, it's done a bit more logically. He says that raiders attacked the hospital and that basically everyone died there, and at least that explains why they can't go back there and why there are so many bodies. She'll want to know the truth. In the game, he lies in a much more primitive way, and the logical hole remains open, and there's another strange moment. In the series, Ellie asks, "And is Marlene okay?" And that's a bit strange. In the game, she didn't care about this at all, and that makes sense. They weren't close, so why would she suddenly think of her? I don't get it. Later, Ellie starts talking about her survival, about how she was with that friend in the mall, that she got bitten, and that someone didn't make it. And in the game, that was a powerful moment. Because you find this out together with Joel. It's a revelation. It was an emotional blow because it explains her behavior, her fear, her survivor's guilt. In this series, you've already seen this in episode 7. It's not new information for the player. It's only new information for Joel. This moment loses its weight. It doesn't reveal anything anymore. It just repeats itself. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's just that it could have been stronger if they hadn't built Left Behind into the series. If they had done it differently. Within the chronology, it didn't work the way it was supposed to. And now the ending, an important detail. In the game, when Ellie says her final line to Joel, she's standing there fidgeting with her pinkies. That's her gesture, that's how her inner anxiety shows. You can feel that she's on the edge, that this is truly important to her, that she wants to understand whether Joel is lying. In the series, she just stands there like a tree in a clearing. In short, of course, I want to somehow sum it all up, to praise the series for something else. Well, just because on the first viewing it seemed like it was actually a really good adaptation. And honestly, at first it felt like they were doing everything carefully, with respect for the original. But with each new episode, that feeling died. Slowly and systematically. And after the second viewing, everything became as obvious as possible. It was like I was just watching a parody. The Last of Us series is just a high-budget retelling of the game. And with an unreliable narrator and a trimmed runtime, no less.